Hello, class. Let's jump into the lecture that we did not get to do on Saturday due to the rain. Um, if you're new, welcome to the Millennial Miss Frizzle channel. I teach a adult continuing education class. This is the nature experience class with PBS Affinity Education. On this particular day, we visited Target Rock Wildlife Refuge, National Wildlife Refuge. We look at us, we were all smiling in the rain. We had a great time and saw some fun stuff. So each week I would like to cover something different. Some attacks on the environment and nature, including misinformation or misleading information, defunding of environmental agencies, programs, and initiatives, and rolling back of environmental protections, and how you can see them acting out in real time in our local environments. Today, we're going to talk about uh, some programs that are going to be defunded or in the process of being defunded, and why that's a problem. But first, let's talk about what is an ecosystem. If you've been in any of my other classes, such as my bug out class, we've talked about this. An ecosystem is a system where biotic, the living, and abiotic or non-living factors work together to form a complex and dynamic unit. They perform biological functions and ecological services, such as regulating climates, providing resources such as food and timber, and recycling nutrients, and also cleaning the air and water. Some of the living parts of the ecosystem include the plants, animals, the microfauna, bacterial organisms that live in the soil, and some of the abiotic factors are more concrete things that you can see and touch, such as the rocks, the dirt, the water, but even less concrete things like sunlight, heat, the amount of sunlight, things like that. Um, if the water is moving or not moving, those all play a part in what kind of an ecosystem you're going to have. This is a food web, but it still gives you kind of an idea of how the parts of the ecosystem work together. You have your plants, which are the primary producers that grow from the sun, right? They use the energy from the sun to grow. You have the beaver eating it in this particular example. You have the wood duck eating the plants. You have the possum eating the plants, the hawk eating the possum, and the wood duck. The plants are also used as habitat. You have larger species such as the alligator. And then obviously there's going to be a lot of species that aren't pictured here, like um, the decomposers, right? Everything that dies is going to be decomposed by these decomposers, such as the bacterial decomposers, fungi, worms, etc. You want to think about each species in an ecosystem like one of the blocks in this house. Once you start removing a species, the house is going to start to fall. And depending on which species you remove, more or less of the house is going to fall. The more species that you have in an ecosystem, the more stable that house is going to be, the more blocks that you have to work with. And so that if one gets removed, the less likely that the whole house is going to fall. There are certain species that are more important to the ecosystem, and we call them keystone species. And if that species were to be removed or go extinct, it's more likely that the entire house is going to fall. For example, we think about the wolves in Yellowstone Park. They were a keystone species, and when they were reintroduced within, I think, 5 or 10 years, literally the rivers were rerouted. It literally changed the course of rivers. It's crazy. But I digress. So there are a lot of agencies in the government that have to do with the environment. We have the EPA, NOAA, the National Oceanographic Atmospheric Administration, and they provide the data which supports the National Weather Service, National Park Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, United States Geological Survey, the Department of Energy, and USDA. And just like the species in an ecosystem that all work together to perform different biological functions and support uh, different processes, none of these agencies work alone. And they affect more people and processes than one, than what's listed here, two, than the environment, right? They all have to do with the environment, but they don't just deal with the environment. Everybody thinks that there's this misconception that there's this dichotomy, right? You have to either choose the economy or the environment. Um, that's not true. And we'll talk about that. We'll talk about it later. I'm not going to talk about it right now. But all of these agencies do support not just the environment and not just each other, but they do also support the economy and our populations. So what I want to talk about today is NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Association, alongside the National Weather Service. And what would happen if slash when that one were to be defunded. Put your hand up if you think the weatherman is always wrong. I'm going to go ahead and say you probably have your hand up. And that is because of confirmation bias. If you only remember, or if you start with the assumption that the weatherman is always wrong, you're only going to remember the times that the weatherman was wrong. Funnily enough, if you look at a 10-day forecast, which is so long, so far away, it's right 50% of the time. If you look at a 7-day forecast, it's actually right 80% of the time. And if you look at a 5-day forecast, then that's right 90% of the time. The other problem is that most people don't actually understand how weather forecasting works and or how to read a weather forecast. An interesting fact about weather forecasting is that 30% of the variability and uncertainty in a weather forecast system is because of clouds. And that's because clouds are such a complex and variable system that the models and computers that we use for forecasting just can't compute the data um, that clouds give us. That's an oversimplified version of it. There's more to it, but that's the gist of it. So if we're talking about NOAA, these are just some of the industries that NOAA and the National Weather Service support. They support fishing and ecotourism. They help predict and control wildfires, FAA, and uh, shipping, insurance, retail, utilities, and also agriculture. In terms of supporting fisheries, um, what NOAA does, well, let me back up. NOAA has three main goals: to understand and predict changes in weather, climate, oceans, and coasts, share that information with others, and to conserve and manage coastal and marine ecosystems and resources. And they do that with all of the resources that they can possibly get their hands on. They have 18 satellites, 1,300 buoys, airplanes, radars, weather balloons, weather stations. They've got boats with radar that scans the bottom. They've got these little submarines um, that also scans the bottom. They've got um, uh, coastal monitoring stations. They've got just so much, so many different ways to monitor the ocean and the atmosphere, and also fish populations, because that's one thing they do, right? Is if there is an issue with a population or a species of fish being overfished, they can inform other agencies that can put limits on fishing that population or that species of fish so that it doesn't become overharvested. Okay, so fishing and ecotourism. So not just informing fisheries on, hey, stop fishing that fish, you're going to overfish it, but also for safe ocean travel. Uh, that's not just for fishing, but also for the ecotourism part. Wildfires. There are three parts of a fire. You need fuel, you need oxygen, and you need heat. Wildfires aren't just caused by droughts. That's a big misconception. You need fuel. Live trees aren't fuel. Trees that are hit by a drought don't dry out so fast that they're going to instantaneously become fuel. What you need first is several years of above average rain to make those trees grow. And then you need a weather event that is going to unhinge the limbs, the boughs, the branches, take them off the tree, and put them on the forest floor. And then you need the drying event. Then you need the drought that's going to dry them out. And then once you have that spark, you have your forest fire. So NOAA will track rainfall and weather patterns that can be a precursor to forest fire conditions. And also, if a forest fire were to occur, they can track uh, wind patterns um, to predict which way smoke is going to be going. FAA, um, NOAA helps to plan safe routes for aircraft. For insurance, um, NOAA helps risk assessment and also claim verification. I remember during Sandy, there was I my parents live on a canal, and they were obviously hit very hard during Sandy. I just remember there was all these cars parked on my street that I had never seen before. People brought their cars into these flood zones and just left them there because they knew it was going to flood, and they wanted a new car. So they'll use this data from NOAA to find out exactly where flooding occurs, so that they're not paying people out that aren't deserving. Retail, between 3 and 6% of GDP depends on weather. GDP is just the amount of money people spend in the economy, the amount of money that is moving around. Utilities and energy. NOAA helps predict energy demand and plan for extreme weather events. In the summer, we use a lot more electricity for our air conditioners because it's so hot, right? Um, and in the winter, we might use a lot more oil or natural gas to heat our homes. So that's something we have to plan for. That's something that utility companies have to plan for. And also, in the event of, again, extreme weather events, that's, again, something utility companies have to plan for. They have to be able to protect their critical infrastructure. I had a thought and I forgot it. Maybe it'll come back. Moving on. So here's a little example of the data that NOAA provides in action. Down here we have a picture. I pulled this off of Google, but it's a shipyard in Montauk. And they need to order supplies. So they might order it from a local company called Seacoast. They are a retail distributor, wholesale supplier of marine supplies. If you need buoys, you need ropes, you need boat batteries, propellers, um, all that fun stuff. Paint, the special paint that they use on boats. Um, yep, they got it all. So they would order from Seacoast, and then they might have this dude. His name is No Toe Dave. Deliver the supplies to your marina, and then Big Dave might bring home fresh scallops to me. This is not the fresh scallops. This is some other local seafood. Um, but without NOAA, we wouldn't have any of this local industry. Because on Long Island, there are a little over 8 billion people, and 34,000 of those people have jobs in the fishing industry. Those are people who just directly in fishing, okay? Those are fishermen or baymen, right? They work on the water. Those do not include the people who work at Seacoast. They're not the truck drivers at Seacoast. They're not the waitress that brought me my lobster tail or the chef that brought me my lobster tail. Those are just the fishermen. And those fishermen made $1 billion in wages. Again, does not include the people who supplied the um, the supplies at the marina, the truck drivers, the chef, the waitress, so on and so forth. So there's a lot more money in this industry than is actually recorded on Long Island. In 2020, there was 435 commercial fishing establishments. And those commercial fishing establishments brought in 20 million pounds of fish. 20 million. I mentioned earlier that there's this misconception that there's a dichotomy, this false dichotomy, uh, that you have to either choose the environment or the economy. Here's one example that if you support your local environment, it can support your local industry. But two, did you know that for every degree Celsius we go up in global temperature, our economy is going to suffer by 12%? Yes, for every 1 degree Celsius we go up in global temperature, GDP is going to decrease by 12%. That is because up to 40% of global GDP is rooted in the environment. That again, GDP is just all of the money that is moved around, every dollar you spend or is spent in the world or in, let's say, the United States, depending on which one you're talking about. So they're not independent. The economy relies on the environment. Without the environment, you have no economy. So last year, NOAA supported, this is the whole United States, $321 billion in commercial and recreational fishing industry that sustains over 2.3 million jobs. So that's whole United States. Staff cuts at NOAA will lead to overfishing and major losses for the industry. In 2017, there was extreme weather events that caused over $306 billion in economic damages and 362 deaths. Every year, the United States gets, I think it's like 3,000 tornadoes. It's either 300 or 3,000. I'm adding a zero or I'm forgetting a zero. It's a lot. It's a lot of tornadoes. And we get at least 2 major hurricanes. The mining industry supported over 600,000 US jobs. By mining, I don't mean coal. I mean offshore mining of trace minerals, like these manganese balls that are found on the ocean floor. It's offshore ocean mining. Manufacturing and retail accounted for more than 28 million jobs and more than $3 trillion for the US economy. And again, um, between 3 and 6% of all retail is influenced by weather. US utilities infrastructure is valued at over $1 trillion. And again, without knowing weather events and weather patterns, it's going to be difficult to, one, protect it, two, prioritize energy demands. Here are some of my citations in case you're interested. Please send me your questions, your comments. I'd love to hear. And I will see you all in class on Saturday if you're in my class. If not, I will try and share these again. Thanks for joining in. Good night.